Okay, so we are live. So again, always welcome for those of you watching live, and welcome to those who are watching on the replay. So today we have Alison Blackler as my guest. So thank you very much for joining me, Alison.
Thank you for having me.
So I always say this is how I introduce all of my lives. I don't actually introduce you myself because I think there's so much about people. There's so many highlights. I could probably go on so much, and I don't want to just reel off your LinkedIn profile. I'd
Sure.
just like you to introduce yourself, the highlights that you think is important for people to know in the context of maybe this conversation or anything important you would like people to know about you.
Brilliant. Well, as you say, I won't reel off my LinkedIn because we're on LinkedIn and people can look at my profile. So my name is Alison Blackler. I am the founder of Two Minds. My main area of expertise is making sense of ourselves. So from a mind perspective, from a behavioural perspective, from an interaction relationship perspective. I'm a mind coach because I have studied the human brain for nearly 30 years now. So I started off as a therapist and have done different types of coaching and NLP and different kind of areas. So for me, I can really get into the detail of how complex we are, why we're complex, and then how we can make the changes. So my offer is very much that sort of making sense of yourself and then others.
Nice. I love that because I think for me, all of these conversations are really interesting in that we're all unique, and I think the biggest journey that I've ever been on is trying to understand myself, what's happened in my past or how I perceive things. And when I say things like that, I think it's often it can be taken that there's been a big traumatic event in your life or something major has happened that has changed everything. And um, I think that can be very misconceiving because you can say, okay, well, like my childhood was very straight, very very calm in very many ways, very average, let's say. But that doesn't mean that we didn't internalize things or situations and made them either bigger in their head, or we perceived them in a way that others who were in the same situation would have seen from a different angle. And I felt for a lot of my life that I just wanted to understand more of it. And I went on so I moved out to Luxembourg about 10 years ago, and I actually went to see a therapist. And I've said this many times, it was probably one of the best things I ever did. I think there's this big negative connotation, especially around men, and I'd like to just sort of change that for men. It's not just specific for men, but that we don't talk about a lot of things, our feelings or what's going on in our mind, and we feel sometimes that that's not okay, or we're going to be perceived as weak. Now, when I first went to therapy, I didn't think I was weak, but I thought something was wrong or broken or something needed fixing. And the reality was the therapist at the time said, no, you're actually very courageous and brave to go and look internally at what's going on. And honestly, it was the best thing I've ever done. It was so enlightening, so understanding what's going on and maybe why it's going on, clearing some of that stuff so it doesn't hold you back is such a powerful thing. So whenever anyone asks me, I don't shy away from saying I went to therapy, because there is this connotation that you can't handle the world, or you can't you can't manage things. But no, we are complex, right? And I'm sure you'll get into it. Our mind sometimes plays tricks on us, sees different things, processes it differently, and no one taught us to manage all that. So when you have an expert like you that can shine a light and just explain things or just ask questions, it's amazing what revelations can come out of it.
Yeah, because we are complex. The human brain's job is to protect, but it does get lost in some of the stuff that's stored within our minds, all our experiences. And you're absolutely right. It doesn't matter what's happened to you. You don't have to have had a great big traumatic thing. But the reality is your reality is your reality, and it will have times where your mind is being really helpful, and it'll also have times where it's being really unhelpful. And what I help people do is navigate those two things so that they can have things different. And I think to your point about men, that is something that I'm really passionate about talking about. And a lot of my clients are men. There has been a shift in my years of working in this field. Was a lot less men many years ago. And I think it's the opposite now. And this is what we need to talk about generally, is it used to be seen as, oh gosh, you're obviously not handling things, as you said. But actually it isn't. It's the opposite. People who do seek help are the people who are going to be probably the most successful. So it's almost that vulnerability, that feeling of vulnerability is the thing that actually gives you courage, but also gives you the results. And that's what, we need to do. And it's the same with the businesses that I work with. They are often quite courageous because they are going to put themselves forward to, have things challenged, have their beliefs challenged, have their behaviors challenged. And again, that takes innovation and courage to do. But the results are that they will understand themselves better. They will then understand their colleagues better, the people they're leading, and everyone's a winner. And then ultimately your bottom line is better, and your staff stay and your staff grow. And this is what I love to talk about, is that sort of connection between each of us, and then how do we make that better? I mean, something you said, we all know that we're different, but actually in the moment when it's going a little bit stressful or a little bit wrong, we often forget that we're not all the same. So we'll assume that somebody is going to respond in the way that you expect them to, and they don't. And then you're surprised. And it's like, well, you know that everyone's different. But in my observations, people forget that. It's like it sort of slips out your mind. You'll just assume that everybody's going to understand exactly what you've said. You can say the same thing to 5 people and they will all hear something different. And what I like to help businesses and leaders understand is why that happens, and then how do we communicate so that we can speak to everybody. So my big offering is about the how. So it's less about the what you're talking about, it's the how you're talking about it. And that really helps people, because I can use a lot of the neuroscience and bring in the reality, so that we're not just talking fluffy stuff, we're talking real stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point in terms of sometimes it feels a bit like woo woo, or people like to put people in boxes. I've been a bit the same, but I think there's certain parts, characteristics, certain things that you can say, yes, people are the same, but that doesn't mean they're going to react the way that you think because of they're this type of person. Let's say introverted. It's easier for me to say introverted. There's many different categories, and I think I've had a lot of conversations recently, and what's coming out is really about putting people first. And I see most successful people are the ones that put people first, whereas businesses often put the business first. But if you can switch that, and if you can put the emphasis on people, focus on them, what their needs are, and understand them better. And a big part of why I started these lives is because I believe business is changing massively. It's not the same as my dad when he went to work. He just went to work and did what everything needed to be done. And that's great. And my dad worked very hard. But in between all of that, technology has come in. The way that we consume things, knowledge, we're always switched on. So much has changed in that time. The way that businesses seem to still want to work is the same way that my dad did, force people, tell people what to do, and just sort of execute as robots. Now, for me, something didn't click. I did that for a long time, but then I realized, okay, we're all different. My energy is different when I show up. And we don't fit into those boxes, those categories where people wanted me to fit in with a job title or something like that. Yes, it's super helpful, but we're so much more than that. And what I found is that actually if you can switch that as a business, if you can focus on the people, who they are, understand them. And I know that I think there's a fine line where you can't pander to everybody's needs and you can't mother people, because people still need to take responsibility for their actions and what they do. But if you allow them to bring more of themselves, understand who they are, their energy, how they work, what they see, how they perceive situations. And that doesn't mean that you need to go deep, deep, deep into every single person, because that's quite exhaustive. Yeah, I think that's how I say it. But I think allowing those people, understanding, okay, how do people work well together? What maybe is missing? And I think oftentimes we say, okay, we've got these organization structures and you've got these people, and you go, okay, on paper that looks fine. You've got like a manager and a person underneath, an admin, but it's not. It's what's missing. What's like, there's something, the energy, the connectivity, the communication, someone that sees something slightly different but can be the conduit between those two people. I think there's so much in that businesses are missing. And I think in today's world where everything is hectic, if you can look at business from that perspective, yes, sure, you need to make money, but the more people are happier and they understand themselves and they can bring themselves to work, the more successful that business is going to be, and for the longer term, not just for a couple of weeks or a year.
But I think going back to the point of, we all know that everyone's different, and yet when it kind of gets difficult, we forget that. It's almost the same in business when the pressure's on and businesses are really working hard and they're very busy. If you ask a leader, what's your best asset, most, of course, they know it's their people. But actually, when it comes down to it and when the pressure's on, that's sometimes we forget how to behave or how to be and to get the best out of people because the pressure's on. So, you talked about sort of mothering people. I can't remember that was the word you used, but I see that a lot. People, I call it rescuing, in teams where a team are struggling, that the deadline's looming, pressure's on, so everybody's behaves in a different way to how you would when it's all calm. But one of the things that I often hear businesses say, or leaders, managers say, is, when you talk about you need to be able to understand each person on your team, and some people have got 5 people, some people have got 50 people. That feels like, oh my goodness me, that is so overwhelming. I can't do that. But I often remind people, when you put the time in to start to understand everybody, and it doesn't have to be like every single, like you say, everybody's like I could understand everybody. They don't need to understand that. But if you do put the time in, it pays back later. So, because I'll often remind, when they say, well, we haven't really got time to do that, all that with the managers. Because for me, it's about having inspiring managers, leaders who can help everybody get the best out of themselves. But then if you often ask them, well, how much time do you put in when it starts going wrong? And they go, yeah, a lot. So, it is about being courageous and putting in the time to understand people's differences, where your skills are, who's good at this, who's good at that. It's often that sort of, have you got the right people in the right seat? Sometimes you don't. I work with a lot of businesses who, when we have a look under the lid, people are in the wrong roles. And sometimes you can do a little move around and everyone's so much happier, because we often see leaders or managers get promoted because they're good at the job, which is great. And that naturally means they probably got the knowledge and the expertise in their role, but then can they manage people? Because people are complex, I think. And again, to reverse almost what I've just said, businesses do know that their people are an asset. But if you ask a lot of leaders, what's your biggest headache? They'll say the people. But that almost hurts me to think that that's how it's seen, because there are some things that you can do to change that, to really change that. And some of it is ourselves. So it's the assumptions that we make. It's the ideas that we make. And, obviously we're going to talk about sort of generational stereotyping, I'm sure later. But, the the assumptions, what we make up, the noise that we've got going on in our heads in life, but also in teams and businesses, is what gets in the way. So often it's the ideas that we create in our own minds that are the problem.
Yeah. So something, as you were talking, stands out in my head. And I thought about this a lot. So the way that I've often seen it, I've worked in corporations for 25 plus years. And what tended to happen over time is that people were very good at their job. There was maybe specific, I'm going to take accountancy. I've never actually worked with an accountant, but is it hopefully
I work with a lot of accountants.
Okay. It's maybe something people could understand. Maybe they were really good with their clients, and they were, top in the department, and they just love numbers. They absolutely loved it, and they could see things and how to do things, and they could do it really quickly. And as a reward, those people are given a promotion, as in a manager of the team, or a leader. Now, what tends to happen is, because of the leader, because of that role, then they need to switch and look after everybody else. Then they do less of the thing that they were really recognized for and really enjoy, and then have to take on a whole new skill set that isn't naturally what they are good at or enjoy. So it's almost this reward becomes this pain point for everybody, not just the person doing the job, but also the people that they're leading. And my vision is that a lot of companies won't need these hierarchical structures anymore. It will be, people still need to be rewarded for doing a great job and recognized, but the recognition shouldn't come into changing what you were doing. Because if you're really good at something, just do more of that. Just, because you'll lean into that and you'll do it so much better. Maybe go into a course and people go, okay, you're good at that. Now we're going to give you something else to be good at. And it doesn't necessarily work that way. Now, with that, I think there are people that are promoted and are very good managers or leaders. And I think, there are ways to help people understand all of that. But where I see this becoming a problem is that often the expectation from businesses are, okay, you're going to promote this person, just say that they're really good. And they're expected to do all this other stuff. And then on top of that, look after their people and understand them. Now, for me, looking after your people, understanding them, bringing the best out of them actually is the bigger part. The smaller part should be that you just I don't know, you're doing some of the other stuff, but we don't. It's like this dynamic. But understanding people, seeing what their skills are, like you say, spending the time with people takes time, but it is an investment, a huge investment, but such a rewarding one, because once you do that, you can bring people up, you can understand the dynamics, all of this stuff. But we attribute such little time, and we squeeze so much out of these people that they don't actually have enough capacity to do the thing so it's almost backward in many, many ways.
Definitely. I mean, I see this a lot, so somebody does get promoted because they've shone, they haven't been given the skills to know how to lead. So they'll lead in the way that they think is right, which might work for some, but it won't work for everyone in the team. That there isn't any adjustment to the workload that they had before. So this is on top. And people take up time. But I think one of the things that I like to encourage people to do is to understand yourself first. Because your style of managing will come usually from your parents, because they were your first managers. So naturally you will do it like that. And then you'll learn skills. We'll all have stories of amazing managers that we loved, and we'll all have stories of managers that we did not love at all. And, being able to identify what was the difference. And if you ask most people, I've been doing this a long time. If you ask most people, think back to a manager that you absolutely loved, what was it about them? And I can guarantee these similar things. They say they listened, They encouraged them to have a go at something. They kind of pushed them. They gave them that. That's an inspirational manager. You've got to have the time to be able to do that, but you've got to have the skills yourself to be able to do that. Because if the pressure's on for you as the leader, and you know, it's your responsibility to get the work done, and you're not able to do the inspiring leader bit, it means you'll be doing the down in the detail of the tasks. So you won't be leading the people, you'll be leading the task, which needs to be led. But if you lead people well, they can all do well in their role. And I think that's something that can be the difference that you can gain, is that everybody actually does hold themselves accountable for their bit of the jigsaw. But that means the leaders, the managers, can be doing the managing and not the everything. Because I hear it all the time, you know, a manager, there's a crisis, you just, accountants are one of my main clients. So there's lots of deadlines, there's lots of pressures that are not movable. So they have to work to those deadlines. And a manager will just say, oh, it's okay, I'll do it. It's okay, I'll take over, I'll do it, which is great on one level because the job gets done. But what about them? What about the burnout for them? What about the situation for them? But also, what about the impact on the other person, on the person who's suddenly like, oh, it's happened again. My manager's just took it off me. So, you know, we really need to shine a light on these behaviours which help then somebody move forward.
Yeah, I often see things like that as a short-term win, long-term pain. You know, yes, the job might get done now, but at what cost? You've lost quite a lot of, you know, momentum, motivation from the person themselves, and like you said, the leader's going to be burnt out, and that's going to be quite painful all around. And yeah, it's to another point that you said about this awareness. I've said this a number of times in my lives. Self-awareness is like a superpower. If you understand yourself, it's just like, oh, okay, because the way that you show up and the way that you react, and it's not about being perfect and you understand everything, because, you know, life is messy. Things do happen. Deadlines creep up, or, you know, tech goes wrong. You know, anything can happen. But if you understand how you are and, you know, how you respond in situations, and you just give yourself that little pause, and the way that you show up can be the difference between a big argument, people, you know, falling out, etc. And that starts with you. If you understand how you're going to show up, and you go, oh, okay, I'm going to be stressed about this, or okay, just create the environment where you're not, or take yourself out of the situation for 10 seconds or whatever. It sounds easy. I think it's, you know, it takes practice, you know, but understanding yourself first, like you said, and then you can relate to other people. And I think this is probably a really good segue into actually our topic about sort of generational stereotypes. So I think, let me just sort of lay the foundation work. I think as leaders, you know, we're in charge of all different levels of people, you know, and that doesn't mean, you know, older people. It just means just younger people coming into the business, etc. So let's just quickly, you know, congratulate you about your TEDx talk, because this is actually a huge achievement, right? This must have felt absolutely amazing. So do you want to just give some sort of context of the talk, how it worked for you, you know, how you decided on that subject, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So for me, yes, the TEDx talk was the biggest thing, I think, achievement to date. It was enormous. For me personally, it was pushing myself out of my comfort zone, and I've done it. So, you know, there's a whole story about kind of that. But I think from a you know, leadership point of view, one of the things that I notice is the assumptions that we make, and people make assumptions about all sorts of things. I mean, just to come back to your self-awareness, you know, a lot of people think they're self-aware and they're not, you know, and I say that without sounding, you know, cheeky, but they're not. They're really not. You know, literally, to be self-aware, it takes years. I mean, you know, I've spent 30 years studying this stuff, and it takes years to be self-aware. to be truly self-aware. So I think it's, you know, something that we constantly work on, and you know, we constantly learn a little bit more. And the most uncomfortable feedback that you ever get will be connected to something that is out of your awareness. So you're not self-aware, but it is having a huge impact. So one of the things that people do, and it's usually out of their awareness because it kind of just happens, is we make judgments and assumptions on everything. So it's a filter from a brain perspective. We have to kind of work out, you know, whatever's going on. We have to have some level of being able to, it's like a sieve. The information's got to go through. How do we feel about this? What's my take on this? Because otherwise we'd explode with all the information that's coming in. So we do make judgments. We do make assumptions about people based on what you believe to be your truth. So that's a fact. But what I notice is that we make allowances around diversity a lot, which is great, and we need to do more. But, you know, that's definitely been turned up. But what people haven't particularly talked about is the age one, is the diversity in a business. You know, some businesses have got 5 different generations working for them. That's really complex on its own. Never mind all the stuff we talked about earlier on. That in itself is complex, but it doesn't need to be. And I think when you set out to do a TEDx talk, their strapline is ideas worth sharing. And it has to be an idea that is a bit different, that is not being talked about a lot, or you've got an angle that's just that little bit different. And you'll probably know with TEDx, you know, you can't just stand there and waffle. You can't stand there and sell yourself. You just have to have an idea that is posed and then it's put out to the audience and to the people listening. So I started to develop this idea, and then it took me 6 months to craft it to be TEDx worthy. And when I say TEDx worthy, it is quite a process, because at any point they could say no. And even down to having had it recorded on the night of the live audience, and they can still say no. So it is a process. And I think that in itself, for people to understand that anyone who's done a TEDx has, you know, you've had to raise your game to be able to be worthy of them putting you on their platform. So that's what makes it a massive achievement, because, you know, it really is. And I would love anyone listening to this to go and go and watch, you know, my TEDx, but go and watch TEDx. And when you watch people who've done it, appreciate what they've gone through. Really appreciate that they haven't just decided you can just create something and pop it on. You can't. It is a process that you have to go through. So, yeah, so I wanted to pose that question of saying, well, or highlight the fact that we are probably dismissing people based on whether they're older than us or younger than us. And, you know, to your point about business changing, every time a new generation comes into the workplace, of course, it's always changed, and there are always going to be things that are connected to a generation, a group of people. But one of the things I like to challenge is that to have that rooted, you know, to say that the boomers resist change, and to the Gen Zs don't stick at anything, and the millennials, you know, are always looking for meaning. You know, that's a real sweeping statement, which, yes, there are some facts, and yes, depending on the time of when you were born, is going to have some level of that. But if we rule out people who might be different, so, you know, in my talk, I talk about, you know, boomer. I talk about Carol, who's young in her 60 years, who is the one who's innovative. So we can't rule people in and out, because everyone's different. The Gen Zs, we say they don't stick at anything, but we've got more young entrepreneurs than ever before. So they must be sticking at stuff. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do that. So I want people to just consider, what are you judging? What are you doing? And then if you're a leader of a business or a manager, are you listening to the younger people? Are you giving them the voice and the space to hear their ideas? Because they'll have some fantastic ideas. But equally, the younger generation, you know, they need to work out how are they going to lean into the expertise and the wisdom, but without losing sight of their fresh ideas. So it's a journey, it's a navigation that we've got to do so that we get the best out of people. And that's kind of what I wanted to do, is to, and that's what I'm getting is comments are like, oh yeah, you've got me thinking. Great.
Yeah.
Great. That's what I want.
It's strange because as you were talking, I realized that you go, oh yeah, this is something for leaders to go, okay, you've got 5 generations of people in your company. They're all going to think differently. And I was like, oh no, actually, this is a company culture thing. It's, you know, every single person has to think about this themselves. So the younger generation come in, have to think how they're going to be. It has to be that open-mindedness at every single generational level. It has to be built in, because it's not just about you. It's not about excluding other people. You have to have, it's really a mindset shift, right? Because there's a lot of dynamic. It's when you actually think about it, there's so much things in there that we're kind of disregarding, or we don't even realize. And I remember, let's say about 2-3 years ago, I attended this diversity and inclusion talk, because it was quite a big thing. And there was a couple of people talking, and I just thought it was going to be one of those standard things. Oh yeah, tick the box, you know, sort of thing. And there was a guy, he was saying about the unconscious bias. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay. And I'd never really thought about it, but they said it just exists, like this filter that you're talking about. You know, it's easy to sort of say, you know, with racism, etc. You know, it's quite easy to pick out, but the ones that are unconscious just sit in your mind and you have no idea. And it was like, oh, and it's not about blaming. So if we just take things like racism, we often point fingers and say, oh, you're racist, etc., etc. Whereas with unconscious bias, it's not the same thing, but there's stuff going on in your head. Like you say, your filter, based on the way that you were brought up or your experiences or whatever, has created these things. Yep. And if you lean into this, but very without pointing fingers, without judgment, and just go, yep, absolutely, I'm going to come to this table with unconscious bias, and I don't know what they are, and be able to be okay with that, and people not call you out, because I don't like calling out. It sounds like a quite a negative term. Just be open about it and say, oh, okay, you know, I think, you know, we're picking people from certain schools, or, you know, people with certain degrees or something like that. And it was like, oh, and this is just the diversity thing. And I was like, oh, okay. And it shouldn't be a judgment thing. It should just be, again, an awareness thing. This thing is playing out in so many decisions. I will have them. You will have them. Okay. And if you can not make it fun, but you go, okay, let's look at this. And then I think that leads into this whole generational thing where you kind of get the people together, and, you know, no one's right, no one's wrong. You just go, how do we make the best of this? Okay, listen to everyone's opinion. And when I say listen to everyone's opinion, I think this is something that everyone wants. Everyone wants to feel included, wants to feel heard anyway. So by doing this, you're actually, you know, building a business or changing the way that people show up in such a great way. So it doesn't need to be a painful exercise. You know, again, we say about diversity and inclusion, and everyone goes, oh, they roll their eyes or whatever, and they think, oh, it's another thing we've got to do. But this actually is something that can be the DNA of the company, understanding what's going on and just going, okay, yeah, we need to do this. Let's make it fun. Let's make it enjoyable. Everyone can bring their opinions, you know, as long, for me, I always say, as long as you're respectful, I think that's the main thing. And you have to, you know, you can't always be that way. Some things come out and you're going to upset people. You're not intentionally, but just make that fun. Allow people to bring their thoughts, their ideas to the table, and then that feels like it might be the first start to challenging some of those things. Does that make sense for you, or is there a better way of, would you say, of starting if you were a company and listening to this?
If you're a company, yeah, I think, you know, obviously one of the biggest gateways to making any changes for me is to be curious about what you're doing. So be curious about your biases, be curious about your assumptions. But I think for me, what I'm trying to promote here is, instead of seeing a divide, so a generational divide within your teams, what I'm proposing is, what if the divide isn't generational? What if it is the fact that you're not finding a way to change your processes or your culture, whichever it is, to be able to hear from everyone and not have this dismissive, you know, you literally see it where people are just dismissed. Well, what do you know? You've only been here 5 minutes. What do you know? I mean, you know, what if they did know? What if they had an amazing idea? Because they might have. I'm not saying everybody, you know, in a workforce, you'll have people who come in, do the job, go home. Come in, do the job, go home. And you'll have people who've got loads of ideas. And, you know, obviously you've got to harness some of that, because sometimes some people do have too many ideas and they need somebody to help them with that. But that's another thing. But, you know, for me, it's just being able to get the best out of everyone and have everyone feel fulfilled. You know, tech has changed. I think you mentioned it earlier. Tech has changed so much, but it's changed how we show up. And I think when we look at generations, again, we're making assumptions that the young people are going to be brilliant at tech. That's an assumption, because there are some young people out there who, you know, and then obviously there's an assumption that, like, people who are my age are not going to be that good at tech. Not necessarily true either. Or if it is true, how do we get the best out of those situations instead of just ruling out things? And that's what I want us to really embrace, these diverse perspectives that come from age. You know, so we know that there is a fact, you know, it's not about personalities. There is facts about where you were born, what was going on in the world when we were all born. I'm very curious about the young generation coming in now, because they, you know, what they show, what they bring is different, and it's refreshing, some of it. You know, I think that a lot of generations did have the attitude of, you know, you just have to keep working as hard as you can, and you know, a badge of commitment is that you've stayed late. You know, and actually, no. You know, I'm really keen to look at what these younger generation, they are better generally at saying, no, it's time to go. You know, I don't work today. Good. Let's bring that into the workplace, and let's really look at how do we make that happen. You know, there's so many different aspects of this. And for me, be curious, you know, just disrupt a little bit of your own thinking. Because if everybody did that, if everybody sort of just turned down their judgment about the generations, you literally hear, I mean, the papers are full of judging different generations for different things. If we all turned down our judging, just that little bit, and you were able to disrupt your own thoughts, your own biases that you're making, there would just be that little shift everywhere. Just that little tiny shift everywhere. And that's what I, you know, really feel quite strongly about, because I hear people being told, no, we've always done it like this. We're not changing it. Wow. You know, what if that thing that person has come up with is just a huge difference in terms of being more efficient, being leaner, being, you know, whatever it is. But equally, you know, we've got to think about the how. So how all these things come about, because it all takes time to be hearing everybody. You know, everybody's ideas won't be valid and possible. but at least everyone feeling heard and appreciated is, it sounds a bit cliche, but it is, that's the ultimate goal. So it's the how we do it, I think, is the bit that, you've got to work out how that actually is going to happen.
Yeah. There's so much in that I kind of, all these threads in my mind I want to pull on, but something that I think is important to sort of reference is when you were talking, when you said, "Oh, someone saying no, that's the way we've always done it." I often feel that ego is playing a part, and I know ego can be this strange sort of concept, and I'm one of these people that have been so hard on myself. In my head, I am my worst friend. It is absolutely terrible. Now, over the years, I'd say the last couple of years, I've started to be a bit kinder to myself, and that is in the words that I say. I don't beat myself up as much. Again, it's a journey. It's not an overnight thing.
No.
And what I found is, if I can just give myself 1%, just catch myself in the moment, just be a bit kinder. When I'm kinder to myself, I'm a lot kinder to other people. I allow more in. I think it's this really strange thing. It's just people see it and then they go, yeah, okay. And so I've tried to be more of myself, try to be less of what I think other people want me to be, because I don't think that's an endless task. And when I do things wrong, I'm okay with it. Still beat myself up a little bit, but just dialing it down 1%. Just aim for that.
Yeah.
And then you notice that other people around you are kind of the same. So it's this fine thing around ego, kindness, less judgment. And I think if you can start with that, starts to open up like a flower, and people go, okay, and they feel that they can do that. And this is an important thing that you were sort of saying. Everyone thinks, oh yeah, we've got to change. And it's almost like, yeah, well, from one day to the next, we're going to be this amazing company. No. Like, if you've been doing something for, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, change takes time. It can be super enjoyable though. You just need to take it step by step, see how it is. Experiment is something that I am recently trying. And this whole idea of experimenting in my mind is so much better than where I used to think pass, fail. If you experiment, see what's working. And like you said, it can just be a tweak sometimes. It doesn't need to be, okay, I'm going to throw everything out and reinvent the wheel. Okay, just maybe move this or something. But again, you don't do that on your own. You should work on yourself. I think we should all do that, like this self-awareness part.
Yeah.
But then you can come together, right? You go, okay, let's throw some ideas on the wall, and then people do feel heard. They do feel that they're contributing, and then they show up and they want to show up more. And like you said, we have to be realistic. You throw 100 ideas at the wall, okay, only 1 or 2 is going to stick. But encourage people to keep throwing ideas at the wall, and keep trying. And yeah, egos do get damaged a little bit when, I've said something and you haven't listened to me. Yeah, and encourage and go, yeah, thank you so much. And just, I think if you can explain to people why it's maybe not the thing that you want to do, or it doesn't make sense, or maybe it's just not the right time. Maybe your idea is just too good, but at the wrong time. It's just a bit too early. We're not quite there. I think if you take that time to express and explain to people, I think they will get it. It might take them a little while, but keep going, keep changing, keep trying.
I think for me, what's coming up is it's not, like you say, it's not that businesses need to be looking same as people's lives. You don't have to change everything. Most things are fine. For me, it's having that self-awareness to assess a little bit of what's really not working here. What is it that keeps, when I hear people say, why does this keep happening to me? It's like, well, let's stop and think about this, so in a business, why does this thing keep happening? What I see is people are so busy, they just move on and it doesn't get looked at. And whatever that might be, it might be a process, it could be the people, but it's just having the courage to put that time in to look at whatever these things are that are not working. But I think sometimes we get a bit lost in these big things, and I think you've hinted at it, big changes, but actually it's the day-to-day small things in teams that can make the biggest difference with how people can show up. So it's what type of praise people want, it's what kind of feedback people want, and give the person what they need, not a blanket, because everybody doesn't need, some people don't need praise, so don't waste time on them. But there'll be somebody who's always at your desk. Can you just check this? Can you just have a look at this? Can you do? And for me, it's just being able to look at that. And that's what in my leadership program, I give them tools to be able to navigate those things so that it is easier, so that it isn't such a minefield of, oh my gosh, every single person needs different stuff. Because it is, it is tricky if you've got quite a lot of people in your organization and they're all going to be different. But it's how everyone takes that responsibility for themselves. That's the ultimate goal, when each person is being responsible. And that might be responsible as in, I need to speak up. It might be responsible of, I'm not going to say that thing. It might be so whatever it is, people need to be able to do that. But some people need the help to create the space. So again, it's cultural, isn't it? If you're in an organization where people know that, you're going to get feedback and, it's going to be done well, great. But if it's not done, so often, I mean, I work with quite a few firms and some of them, you say to them, do you get feedback from your manager? No. It's like, wow. How can they grow? How, what opportunities are you missing there? So for me, it's about breaking down the biases and the assumptions, and then it's how do we harness that individuality, but still keep it realistic? Because, again, you don't want to be getting overwhelmed. But that's often where someone like me comes in, because I can do a lot of that for you. I've got leaders who literally like, can you sort this out? Yeah, okay. I love going to a firm that's got a bit of drama, a business that's got some drama. That's, a drama. That's
probably where you come alive, right? And you can see all these dynamics and yeah, I can imagine. You said something earlier about like the processes and, we touched on it earlier. You need to make space for all of this stuff. Companies say that they're so busy. People say that they're busy. Now, in my experience, in companies, we do so much that we don't need to do. We just do busy work rather than, I'd say, important work. I say that because I've done it. That's been me. And, we avoid or we pick up the easy thing rather than do the hard thing. But I think with all of this, you need to make the space, you need to make the time. And, if you look at it in your own personal life, you go, I haven't got time to exercise or something like that. That's not actually true. We assume that we need, 5 hours a day to go and exercise. No, you can exercise in 10 minutes if you want to, go for a walk around the block. That's exercise. But it comes down to priorities. And okay, if you don't want to exercise, you don't want to exercise, but don't make that an excuse that you don't have time. Again, easy for me to sit here and say, harder to do in reality. But like you've said, all of these things are super important. Ultimately, you want your business to succeed. You want your people to be happy. You want to make profits, whether that's a lot of profits, a little profits, that's for you to decide as a company. But ultimately, your company needs to make money. And in order to do that, you need to look at what goes on behind the scenes. Not just take all these processes that were inherited over 40 years and you're doing it for a client that left you 30 years ago and you're still running a report somewhere that makes no sense. And but you need to put that emphasis in. And again, change can be scary, right? Like, I've done it this way, or I am 100% that person. But again, it can be fun. It can be enjoyable. And you've said this word a few times, being curious. And I like it because it reminds me of my children. Like, they're curious, they ask questions, they come in, they don't care, they just go, okay. And I love it because, and they often ask me stuff, and I go, oh, and it makes me think, and I go, oh yeah, I'm just doing that because that's what I thought a parent does. Okay, like, actually, and it allows me to question it, and I find it fun a lot of time, and I thank them for showing up and saying that. And it can be good, if you do the same thing every day, it can get boring. Yeah, make it fun. Just, all these things don't need to be a hard slog. They can really, engaging with people, seeing them change, coming up with ideas, finding the time, making it a fun session. There's a ton of ways. And like you said, having someone like you that comes in, and your personality is just amazing. We've spoken before this live, but there's so much enjoyment and fun and curiosity in you, and you see these dynamics at play. Get a coach, get someone to come in, just have fun with it. Just go, yeah, okay. And yeah, might feel a bit scary at first, but it's not. It's the way forward. Just imagine what your company could be in a year's time, longer, but it has to start with something. Make it fun, right? Make it enjoyable for people.
Well, I think as humans, and as adults rather, we do get very serious about things. And I think, your mention of children, your children are naturally curious. We were all that naturally curious child once upon a time. And what I'm always interested in is, again, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, you do have to understand your own mind. And that's what my offer is. I've written a couple of books on it so that people can help themselves understand themselves. So when you've got that understanding, you can then start to make the changes. But if you are able to tap into what you would have done as a kid, where it's just like, you don't doubt the fact that you've got a question, you don't feel uncomfortable that you don't know, you just ask. And saying to kids, there's no daft question, we say that in business. And yet when I say to people, they might share a challenge that's going on, and I say, have you shared it? Have you asked a question? Have you, did you ask somebody how they felt about it? No. Why? Because all of the triggers will be there saying, well, I look silly, I look weak, I look like I'm not good enough, they'll get rid of me. All these noise that goes on that we need to then understand. So for me, being curious about what's happened, no judgment on self or others, but be curious. Oh, okay, I'm feeling like this right now. Or, oh, okay, this is what's my response is. It literally is the gateway to making the changes. I mean, I believe that 80% of making any change whatsoever is about being aware of what you're doing in the first place. And that's not a scientific thing. That's just what I believe.
Yeah.
But I genuinely think that if we can just be like, I'm doing that thing again, or there's that thought, or there's that feeling, or I'm doing, or they're doing that thing again, it can change everything. So when we pause to notice what's going on, it gives us that opportunity to do it. And, like some people listen to this kind of conversation who might not feel, getting into that feelings thing is comfortable for them. But, you don't have to do it in a feeling-y way if you're not a feeling-y person, but you still need to be curious about what might be going on for you or for the other person. And yeah, if again, a bit like me sort of saying, well, if we could all challenge our assumptions a little bit more about age, if we all were just able to turn up that little bit of self-awareness, wonder what the world would be like. People would maybe consider things better. first before they go rushing off. And it's, I mean, you picked up on my own offer, but also the impact it has on me. There is nothing greater than being able to see a group of people who suddenly see each other, who can suddenly appreciate each other's differences. So instead of seeing it as a challenge, they see it as, okay, we're different. That's okay. Let's get the best out of our differences. That is an ultimate sort of outcome for a lot of the work that I do, is that people just have that understanding of each other so that they can be like, oh, okay. And that's it. That changes everything.
I've seen that a couple of times where people disliked other people in their department or in their work. And maybe even, especially when I worked in bigger companies, like someone go, oh yeah, I don't like that man or woman or whatever the in the coffee area or whatever. But it touches on your point. People, we all have assumptions about people and go, oh, they look like they're moody or they're not very happy. And you go, that's your assumption of what they are. And I've seen it. So there was a case recently, and I was like, and then they said, oh, no. And they basically attended this session together, and then they almost became best friends. And it's just like,
I've seen it.
It's just like, and you go, they've worked in the same company for years, and they've just assumed that, oh, okay, that person doesn't like me or gave me a bad look or something, which they didn't. They were just having a bad day and were in their own thoughts. And then they go, yeah, they're lovely. Yeah. And the fact is, and they go, yeah, they're quite different, but I really like it.
Exactly. And then if you put the age thing in, you can be best friends with somebody who's a completely different age to you, because you've connected on a level that is irrelevant of the age. We've all got somebody that we've connected with who's a completely different age through a hobby or a sport or something, and we can. And I think just being able to break some of that down, that assumptions that we make, we rule people in and out. We don't know the story. We don't know, get curious about what's showing up, or give, if you can do it. And again, I help people do this, but if you can be skilled at giving somebody feedback on something. So say somebody has got a sort of scowly face. If you give them feedback to say, in the meeting, you sort of come across as scowly, you might get some really interesting information. It could well be just their concentration face. But they don't realize that they're doing it and that people are interpreting it as they're angry or that they're annoyed. But, this is where the brain is so interesting. Somebody can give you a look across the room that you perceive as, oh, I've done something wrong. They're upset with me. They weren't even looking, they've got wind. Literally, this is where we've got to be curious about ourselves, because there's often opportune situations where we are making up that somebody is unhappy with us or there's something going wrong, and it gets in the way.
Yeah. I recently I was invited. So I live in Luxembourg, and someone mentioned if I could do some work for one of the schools in Luxembourg, just at exam times, because it was a French thesis and it was around HR. Not that the HR topic was necessarily the thing that I knew. I've been around HR, I've never been in HR, but they wanted me to come in and assess presentations that are normally done in French, but were converted into English. And it was just more about the expression, the language used, etc. And I said, yeah, I'd love to do it. Now, the reality is most of these students doing it were younger. So they've come out of university. It was like a master's or something. Somehow I don't really understand the system. And they gave presentations. And do you know what? I love being in that room because they were all different. So there was a gentleman who was, I'd say maybe about 40, so he was the exception, but he had a young mind of learning, and he was a very passionate person about what he was doing. But all of these younger generation had different ideas. The way that they showed up, the way that they were doing things I was like, oh, okay. So, but for me, I felt very lucky that I'd been put in a situation where I could do that. And I think with all of this, if you can create situations, you can create, again, it doesn't need to be, okay, you give up your job and go and work somewhere else. You just go and sit with a department where there's younger people, or invite a younger person. I don't know why we're saying like older, younger. There's a whole mix in between, but it's just maybe easier for people to understand. But I was like, yeah, I love this. And when you can create those situations, it doesn't need to be, oh, okay, I'm doing this you just have, I just listened to them talk. And I was like, okay, yeah, they want this, they see this, they don't apologize for showing up. Whereas I've spent most of my career just feeling awkward. They were like, yeah, no, I want this, I can see this. Absolutely great. And I was like, that's cool. And to your point, you said earlier, some of the younger kids are great at technology. Maybe they've got some amazing idea, or they've been doing something on social media or something. I'm giving a very stereotypical example, I'm sorry, but yeah, they could bring that and you go, oh, okay. And most things are not like these big revolutions they are just sort of old concepts just reinvented in some sort of way. Yeah. And you go, okay, and young people love to teach as well. I found that they have a lot to say and a lot to express, and I was like, this is such a great moment, but it's something you can create for yourself. You don't have to wait for other people to create it for you. Go and have a conversation. Just say, hey, could you just show me that? Because it might feel a bit scary and you think, oh, I'm going to get lost, but often not.
This is the thing, isn't it? If we are open to different perspectives, we're open to something maybe that you just don't see yet, then we end up growing, developing, having a greater understanding. I always think I call it you update your system. So if somebody says something, so you've got an idea about whatever it is you're talking about, and that's, again, we've all got our own thing, and then someone says something and shares something with you, and you're like, oh, so you're almost like update your system, so you take that knowledge on. But we've got to, as you say, create some situations that allow us to be able to all do that, and that goes across the generations, and I think that's what's going to be interesting moving forward.
Oh, amazing. I think that's probably a great point to end. So we just run over the hour. So honestly, I love these conversations because I understood maybe a little bit of obviously what you were saying, but you've really helped me open up my mind and think about things and like actually how this dynamic plays out. So hugely grateful for you for sometimes I consider myself open-minded, and then we have conversation. I'm like, oh, you're not as open-minded as you think, Colin. And having these conversations in such an enjoyable way without, oh, Colin, you're not thinking that way, is hugely valuable to me. And I take all of this stuff on, go away and think about it. And I'm so glad there's people like you, coming up with, these new ideas. And, again, congratulations for the TEDx, because hopefully that is even a platform where that spreads much wider, because I know that they're very, very popular, and that's such a great thing to have done. And I'm sure that will lead to sort of changing minds and, changing business. And I think that's brilliant. So I'm so glad. I'm sure I could learn a ton more from you. So again, it was really fun, and hopefully maybe we could do a round two, maybe give it 6 months, a year, see sure how things have changed and what you've seen change in the workplace as well.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. So, people watching this, I know you've got probably a lot of loyal followers anyway, but for the people from my audience, where's the best place to reach out to you? Because I'm sure people want to know more. So I obviously found you through LinkedIn, but is that the best place? Do you have a website? What would you suggest?
LinkedIn. So my website is www.2-minds.co.uk. So on there you can kind of get everything. I've got bits and pieces, free things going. I've got podcasts that you can listen to. I've got some books that we talked about, some self-help books that I've written. So everything's kind of through the website probably. But yeah, I do hang out on LinkedIn a fair bit as well. And obviously I would love everyone to go and have a look at the TEDx talk, which we can put the link
I watched it. It was amazing. It was just, it's I think it's maybe something on my bucket list as well. Just to stand there and share an idea that's I think it's brilliant. So thank you so much. I'll repost this once it goes on to LinkedIn. And thank you for your time. Thank you for being you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And I look forward to speaking to you in the future.
Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Alison. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.